Joseph, you finally made it.
I did. I did. Made it to Lander, Wyoming.
We've been working on getting you on here, I think, for almost 6 months.
I feel like you've been talking about it, yeah, at least since early spring.
One of the reasons I find our conversation so fascinating is because you're one of the only people I know that I feel can apply statistical thinking to how you approach problems. And it seems to me that you have the ability to distinguish your emotional thinking from your statistical thinking and decide which way you actually want to act. What brought this specifically to mind is when I was asking you about buying insurance on my flights. I was going to like Italy or something like that. So an expensive flight. And I was asking you if the insurance products that they offer is worth it. And you asked me if the cost of the insurance exceeded 10% of the total ticket price. And that was kind of your cutoff. And I remember thinking, wow, you have a different approach to how you look at some of these problems. Why are human beings so often bad at applying statistical thinking?
So I think it's a really interesting problem when you try to look at statistics. You're very often humans were applying it to some type of a risk-based assessment. What are the odds I'm going to die if I don't wear a seatbelt today?
Okay.
What are the odds, at kind of a positive risk-based thing? What are the odds I'm going to win the lottery?
Mm-hmm.
Things that are close to a 50-50, we're relatively good at dealing with. If we think like, oh, do I want to go out to this event? I might see so and so there. And you think that, there's a decent chance, but not 100%. We can, our emotions can kind of wrap around that.
Okay.
I think we really struggle as humans with big numbers. The bigger the number is, the smaller the odds, the more difficult it gets to understand it and wrap our head around it. I think two things are going on. One, people aren't doing math. They're saying there's a chance and they're leaving it at chance. That's why people play the lottery. No one plays the lottery after they sit down and work out the fact that statistically they are giving away, like, I think it's roughly half the money that just goes away. Even if you bought every single ticket to the lottery, you still lose money. They don't give it all back. People
Okay.
people won't do the math, so they don't know what the math is. I think that's one half of the coin.
Mm-hmm.
People don't know what the statistics are, and then they can't even think about it. The other half of it is that emotionally, when you say like, "Oh, there's a chance," we hold on to that because we hold on to hope really
Mm.
well as the human species. And I think in a lot of ways, that's a really beautiful thing. Like you should hold on to hope. You should have dreams and things that like you don't see how you're going to get from where you're at to where you want to go to, but you have this idea, there's a chance, maybe if I work on the problem, I can get there. This works really well in building a business or, moving to a new state, getting a job, these kind of things. If you look at it and you're like, well, probably shouldn't go to this job interview since I'm going to fail it anyway. The odds of me getting this job are 5%.
Mm-hmm.
But the guy who says that never gets a job.
Mm.
The guy who says, oh, there's a chance, I've got hope, I'm going to go do this, goes and interviews 20 times and lands a job.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's the guy who gets that job and gets to move forward in life. I think that emotions are much older. They're often, it's why you can't always articulate them. You just have like this feeling.
Mm-hmm.
They live in like, and I'm no brain expert, but like the lizard part of your brain, like lower parts back towards the bottom of your neck and stuff. And they don't think with words, and rational stuff and big numbers and math is not what it can do. Your frontal cortex that handles much more of that just doesn't drive your emotions in the same way.
Wow.
So I think it's people failing to, essentially they let their heart run away with things. They
Mm-hmm.
don't take their brain, so to speak, and say, no, 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 no. Yeah, you think there's a chance you're going to win the lottery today, but there's not. Like, I mean, there's a chance statistically, sure. But yeah, there's also a chance you're going to get struck by a meteor while you're watching the lotto show. Like,
Yeah.
you're not going to worry about that chance. So you probably shouldn't worry about the chance you're going to win the lottery.
I think I remember reading somewhere that if you start a new restaurant, there's a 4 out of 5 restaurants fail. So you have a 1 in 5 chance of it succeeding. 20% chance of success. So you're saying that if you have only a 20% chance of success, you probably should try that thing if that's where your heart is, right? If that's what you want to do. But the same part of our brain that says, yes, my heart is in something that has a 20% chance of success is the same part of our brain that says, yes, go play the lottery because maybe it'll make me rich, right? And that feels the same to the part of our brain that makes those decisions, even though the two the two statistical odds are so far removed from each other in orders of magnitude apart. But it doesn't matter to that part of our brain because that part of our brain doesn't make that calculation. Right. It just says there's a chance this will work and I want the optimal result.
And yeah, I think that's 100% right. I think we chase that optimal result. I think we also chase easy paths. Sometimes in the case of the lottery, it's like, oh, I can do this easily.
Mm.
And if it works, it'll just feel good. And we're chasing a feeling. We're not chasing a business model. Same with like restaurants. Yeah, 20% of restaurants fail. And I'm pretty sure that statistic comes from like the first year or the first 3 years or something.
When I read it, it was between years 1 and 5.
1 in 5.
For what
Sure.
that was worth.
So, okay. So I think that's because restaurants are predominantly opened by people who want to open a restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
Want to know why sewer companies have a better success rate? Nobody opens a sewer company because they're like, that's my lifelong dream. Sewer companies because there's a need in the market.
Mm-hmm.
And I think too many people who open restaurants are dreaming. I think if you went about opening a restaurant in a different way and said, it's not about that I want to open a Mexican restaurant. It's about what does this town need?
What will the market support?
What will the market support? What do I bring to the table? Like if I'm an Italian chef, probably shouldn't open a Mexican restaurant. But if there's already 2 Italian places in town, I need to go to a different town to open my Italian restaurant and be willing to do that. Like whatever it is, you have to bring the business there. And I think restaurants are just too often run from emotion.
You think if someone really was thinking, I want a business that will pay for my beach house and great schools for my kids and awesome vacations, they would go try to find the most boring business that everyone wants. Plumbers, electricians, trash removal, sewer companies.
You need to do one of two things. You need to do something that no one else is offering,
Mm.
or you need to do something that you're better than everybody else at. You got to have a competitive edge,
Mm.
whether it's a skill set that you bring to the table, a network of people you bring to the table. You got to have something because if I can 1 week later compete with you at the same level, you're never going to win in that battlefield. You're a fish swimming in a school and you're not going to be the one that wins.
Right. Right. Huh. Yeah, I just wonder if there's that sexiness factor to certain businesses that other businesses don't have, right? No one ever walks into a bar and is like, "Yeah, I run a plumbing company." Right? But if you say you have a lounge, if you say you have a bar, if you say you have a nightclub, right? All of a sudden you just have this aura of cool because you have something where people want to go, not something where people call you when they need you and are happy to see you go as soon as you fix their problem, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's spot on.
Ugh. Yeah, I remember reading. No, I was watching. What was that name of that documentary, Tom? I think it was Broke. It was like ESPN made this documentary of these NFL and NBA players, 70% of whom were broke within 5 years after retiring from their sport. 70% within 5 years. I mean, and these are guys who are commanded salaries from anywhere from $500,000 to $12 million a year. I mean, in a single year, many of them made enough that if you had carefully guarded that fortune, you would be set for life. But there were all these factors dragging them back towards poverty. But one of them got on and said, that he kept falling for people who say they're going to open a nightclub for him, and he's gonna get to be a nightclub owner, and wouldn't that be cool? And that's the hook that kept getting him, was it's cool to have a nightclub. It's not cool to own a trash pickup company. That's wild. So why can't people think statistically? Is this are we too early in the evolutionary game to use the insights from statistics?
I don't like that question. I think it presumes that the evolutionary game will drive humans that are good at using statistics.
Okay.
And what we have decided to value as a society,
Okay.
like say wealth,
Mhm.
no longer correlates to birth rate. And birth rate is what's going to drive evolution. So
Say more.
So I actually think, not to pivot away from your question, but I actually think evolution is about to go backwards unless we change our values in the West. All the smartest people,
Mhm.
as a woman's IQ increases, the number of kids she has decreases.
Women with higher IQs tend to have fewer children.
Yeah, they're much more likely to be career driven
Mm.
and find a place in the workforce
Mhm.
and decide that they either don't, a few things, don't want kids, want less kids, or simply aren't getting around to having kids because instead of starting to have kids in their 20s or mid 20s, whatever, they're waking up at 34 and being like, oh, maybe I want to have kids and get married. And even if they're successful, okay, now they're having a small number of kids.
Yeah.
Whereas people who are on average lower IQ are going to be less likely to take that path. I mean, the West is being outproduced by the rest of the world right now
In terms of children.
in terms of children.
Okay.
Yes, in terms of
Presumably in Saudi Arabia, right, where women do not hold public positions, your IQ is totally uncorrelated to the number of children you have.
Yeah, I mean,
Presumably.
I don't have good statistics on that,
Right.
but I think that logic follows.
Okay. Whereas in the Western world, you're saying that we now have the statistics. Your IQ is highly correlated to the number of kids you have.
But it's inverse.
But it's inverse,
It's
right?
inverse.
Right.
Historically, it was correlated correctly. Smarter you were, the more successful you're going to be financially, which meant we're not starving to death. We're not, and that's extreme, but we're not getting sick as much. We're not dying in childbirth as much because everyone's better fed, because we're warmer at night. All of these things all work to your advantage, but now we see the exact opposite happening. And yet we think that we're going to like continue to evolve towards what historically has worked, but that's just not how genetics work. Like you can be a billionaire, but if you don't end up having any kids, that was not an evolutionary smart move for you. And that will get weeded out over time, I think.
So we really are studying ourselves to death. Smart people are studying themselves to death.
Yeah, they are.
Right. They're almost weeding themselves out of the population. What's that movie about, like in like 40 years in the future, everyone's really stupid? It's a comedy. Is it Idiocracy?
Think so. I don't think I've seen it, but I've read about it. Yeah.
That's sort of,
I mean, tell me I'm wrong.
is there a correlation between men's IQ and the number of offspring they have that you know of?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
I think
that would be
that's
interesting to look into.
going to be trickier.
Yep.
I'm guessing it would be far less tightly correlated. However, I do know people tend to marry people around their IQ. As much as men might claim they don't care and claim they're willing to date down in IQ, if you've got a 130, 140 IQ, you're going to be really bored with somebody who's an 80 or a 90 IQ. Like you're just going to be like, even 100, even an average person, like if you're a full standard deviation above them, you're less likely statistically to get married.
You probably don't run in the same social circles anyway. You're less likely to meet them.
You're less likely to meet them. You're less likely to find them interesting. And there's good statistics to just back up people do marry around
Within 10 points, usually.
something like that. I mean, it's going to be a bell curve, right?
Okay.
Obviously, people aren't. They're not filling out dating apps going like, all right, I'm going to sort these people by the IQ test they took to get in and can't go more than 5 points below me. But yeah, within 10 or 15
I
points.
have sometimes wondered if there would be room in the marketplace for a dating app called like Completely Honest. And it's just like, it was like how much money you made, what your IQ was, what diseases ran in your family. You know what I mean? Like historical rates of cancer, Alzheimer's, whatever else. You know what I mean? And it was just like
Well,
completelyhonest.com.
I think that would only work in a matchmaking situation where it's where you're not getting to evaluate everyone,
Mm.
but there's someone in the middle who's looking at everyone and then saying, all right, you two are a good match.
There's a relationship broker.
Yeah, a relationship broker, a matchmaker, as
A
they say.
matchmaker, to borrow a historical term,
Yeah,
that has existed for 5,000 years at least. Yeah.
people had them for a reason.
I want to get just going back to statistics for a minute. Someone once said to me, he was in insurance sales, and he said, I don't sell insurance. He said, what I actually sell is peace of mind. Is this related to what we were talking about earlier, whereas people think there's a chance I die in a car accident. There's a chance that I leave my family with no support. There's a chance, blah, blah, blah. There's a chance of all sorts of things. And people want to be guarded against the chance. And very few people are sitting down and saying, okay, if over the course of my lifetime, I pay in X amount into an insurance program, is that really worth the benefit that I might get out of it? I have to assume very few people do that. They just want to buy something that allows them to sleep easy at night, thinking my family will be taken care of, or my hospital bills will be taken care of to a certain degree.
Insurance is always a losing purchase. Insurance companies are not stupid and they make money off you.
Mm-hmm.
So very rarely are you going to come out ahead on a weighted statistical, hey, am I saving money by doing this?
Mm.
I was thinking about this. I recently renewed the truck insurance that I have on my pickup truck. And I was thinking about, do I get full coverage for collision or do I just get liability? And I'd save the $400 or $500 or whatever it would be a year
Mm-hmm.
if I dropped the full coverage.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't drop it, not because it was like going to be the end of the world if I totaled the truck,
Mm-hmm.
but I bought it so that if I total the truck, I can go drink a beer at the bar and have a good time that night and not worry about it and wait for the insurance check to come.
Mm.
And I also bought it so that when I throw the keys to a friend, right? Or and then they do something to it, you know? I'm like, here, you drive the truck up this road, and then they run it off the road, and whatever happens, it's socially much easier to just be like, oh, I got insurance, no worries.
Right.
And then you're not tempted to be mad at them. So that's like why I'm still carrying full coverage on the truck. I'm not carrying it to protect myself financially. I'm carrying it to protect myself emotionally.
Hmm.
Now, the fact that it protects me financially, sure, that's a nice touch.
Yeah.
But I know that it's not financially worth it. So I think the things that make sense to insure are things that you cannot recover from: house insurance and life insurance.
Hmm.
Vehicle insurance, it depends.
Gray area.
I mean, it depends how much too much vehicle you've bought yourself. I don't think you should be buying vehicles that you couldn't torch in the driveway and go about your life. Now, that still can be a very bad day, obviously. But like, you know, you don't need a Ferrari in the driveway if your house costs less than it. You know, it's like buy a reasonable vehicle, something that, you know, you could recover from it. And in 10 years down the road, it's kind of my metric for things. Like 5 or 10 years down the road, will I still notice this? You lose your entire house? Yeah, you're going to know about that in 10 years. You die and leave dependents behind with no life insurance, 10 years later, they'll remember. A car, probably less so. And again, a car that's newer, you know, it's not that much extra to get full collision on it.
What are your thoughts on society's assessment of risk and how we can guard ourselves against it? Two examples come to mind. in the years leading up to the 2008 housing crisis, if you had a little bit of extra money, you were highly encouraged by the banks, by the real estate industry, but also by your society, people around you, get into real estate, add to your portfolio in housing, right? Is there a risk that this all goes bust? People might be willing to acknowledge that, but the risks were downplayed by the society we lived in. 10, 12 years later, um, society was talking about the risk of COVID injury, and then later talking about the risk of vaccine injury. And in America, for a certain period of some months, the risk of COVID injury, the risk of vaccine injury, there were dominant social opinions about those things that I think were totally untied to the actual risks therein. So it seems to me that society can both over overplay the risks of something and underplay the risks of something. How can the thinking man guard against that herd assessment of risk?
I think you need to listen to people who think that something is a big risk.
Mm-hmm.
You need to listen to somebody who thinks it's not a big risk.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to make sure you've thought of both sides.
Mm-hmm.
You have to keep track of what's the innate value of whatever I'm risking. COVID, it would be a life, housing market. What's the innate value of that home? What does that home provide? Real estate holds a lot more intrinsic value than, say, a high volatility stock or something.
Mm-hmm.
Stocks, the business is heavily leveraged and it just goes bust. Stock's worth nothing.
Nothing.
If you're buying real estate, man, dirt's a good investment.
Mm-hmm.
Dirt doesn't go to zero. It can go in half, sure,
Mm.
but it doesn't go to zero. So let me just that one first. I think you've got to watch price to earnings ratios, and in the case of housing, what is the average income? What's the average home price?
Mm-hmm.
Right now, for example, I think that ratio is up to like 7x or something. It's at historic highs.
Mm-hmm.
It suggests to me that houses cannot continue to go up the way they've been going up. There's simply not enough money around to fund it.
There's not enough money going out in payrolls.
People are starting to own homes that are large percentages of their lifetime earnings. So look at 7 years. Let's say the average person has a working career of 40 years,
Okay.
42 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's now an eighth of your lifetime earnings is in your home.
That's if sorry, and do you have a specific number for that home value in mind?
Well, it's the ratio that matters,
The
right?
ratio that matters. Okay.
Currently, it's hovering around 7x,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you make 100,000, that's a $700,000 house.
Mm-hmm.
To make the math easy, if you make 100,000, you're not buying a $4 million house.
Sure.
That's just not, unless you're going to work 40 years, spend no money, pay no taxes, and then buy the home. Like that's not gonna work.
Okay.
So you got as a thinking person, as a thinking man, you've got to keep an eye on that. And I think you've got to really watch trends and understand that just because something has been going the way it's going
Mm-hmm.
does not mean it's going to continue.
And that is a very typical human thought trap, right? We tend to extrapolate along the lines that we see going back into the past, right? We see a straight line behind us. Therefore, we assume the line ahead of us will be straight as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very typical for human beings.
It is.
If current trends continue, right? Right. If current trends continue, the days will get shorter and shorter until we live in total darkness, right? If
Sure.
Right. If current trends continue.
Yes, if current trends continue. Yes, you're right. Took me a minute, but I'm there.
Yeah. Huh.
I think to stay on the housing stock market investing side of things for a minute,
Mm-hmm.
I think that is a giant mistake people are making today. They say, oh, the stock market has returned 10% a year on average over the last 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then they somehow think it's going to continue to do that.
Uh-huh.
I don't think the stock market is going to be the retirement mecca for my generation, certainly not for my children's generation, the way that it was for our parents' generation.
Oh, interesting.
Price to earnings ratio are like 50-1 right now in the stock market as a whole. That's a 2%.
Price to earnings. Stocks tend to be priced 50 times higher than the dividend they earn in a given year.
Than the profit the company is turning.
Okay.
Right. So if I invest $100 into a business in the stock market, on average, that business will make $2 that year.
Mm-hmm.
That does not support a long-term 10% return. That supports a long-term 2% return.
Mm-hmm.
And logically, that makes sense. If the year is, 1860 and the railroads are new, there's all this industrialness going on. We don't have a lot of capital sitting around. It's supply demand. There's a very high demand for capital and a very low supply.
Mm-hmm.
As people continue to save, and now that the 401k is the primary saving vessel,
Okay.
money isn't dying with people. The difference in money you need to live comfortably in retirement for 20 years and for an infinite number of years is not far off. So a lot of people are
Whoa, 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 whoa. The amount of money that you need to live comfortably for 20 years between retirement and your natural death, and the amount of money that you need to live forever is not separated by a huge amount.
No, not at all.
Help us out here.
Comes down to interest. So
okay.
If say I'm retiring at $1 million invested in the stock market, and I want to live on, if I want to live on 50,000 a year for 20 years, okay, well that works, right? No, I don't need any interest. I just need it to keep up with inflation. All right. Well, now let's say I can get a 5% above inflation return. Now I can live forever on the 50,000. But so you start doing the math out and you say, well, I don't really want to live on 50. I want to take some vacations. I want to waste some money.
I want to go see my grandchildren.
I want to see my grandchildren, whatever. Pay for some health care, this whole getting old thing. Okay, well, let's say I want to pull like 75, it's going to be somewhere around 75,000 a year in this example. That's going to run you out of money in 20 years.
Okay.
Right. So if I pull 75,000 out a year, well, the first year, 50,000 comes back in interest, but I've lowered it 25,000.
Right.
Right. That's going to continue to decrease.
Right. Because you're constantly taking away from, call it your principal.
You're taking away from your principal, and you're going to take more away from your principal every year as your interest goes down.
Right. Because you're going to replenish less.
You're going to replenish less. Right. The other problem you have is your dollar cost averaging. You're going to take a lot of stocks out when the market is low, which depending on what happens in that market, so you could end up depleting a lot of the total number of stocks early on if the market takes a dive and you still pull 75,000 out, but now you're not pulling on 1 million, you're pulling on 650,000.
Sure.
That becomes a problem. And so in order to safeguard against that and not, you want to run a low odds that you're going to run out of money in 12 years. Between that, like, well, what if I just had $1.5 million in the bank and then I could drive my 75,000 indefinitely? Right.
Okay. Right.
So yes, you can. And 20 years isn't even that long to plan for retirement. If you're retiring at 65, that's planning to be out of money at 85. That's not a great plan. Out of money at 85.
There's a decent chance you get into your 90s.
Yeah.
Which means now you're dependent on family, or hopefully dependent on family.
Yeah.
Hopefully you have family to depend on.
Right. So people are now dying with millions in the bank.
Okay.
And then we're really in the stock market. And that's great, but because the money's not dying with them the way it would have in a pension plan, well, now that money's getting passed to somebody and probably left in the market. So you just have there's an oversupply of dollars going into the market right now.
This is crazy to think about. Right. A pension plan, as soon as you're dead, right. Sure. Maybe a spouse gets then half benefits, but whatever. It's gonna stop.
Doesn't live forever.
Whereas once we got off pensions, everyone had to keep money in the market or other investment vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
Those investment vehicles, there's no reason they have to be terminated. And so they get passed on to children or spouses or other heirs.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're saying basically, you think there's becoming an overabundance of capital.
That is assigning a value proposition to it and that
Okay.
it's a bad thing.
Okay.
What I'm saying is we have a much freer supply of capital today than we did 150 years ago.
Okay.
There's just a lot more money floating around
Mm-hmm.
being invested. And I think that's going to drive down the return on said investment. If everybody in your town is dirt poor and you walk in with $100,000 to put up a restaurant, man, you could set your prices and like, yeah, they're poor, but no one can compete with you. So you're running a monopoly here. And we saw a lot of that early on in the 1800s, US Standard Oil, for example. But when everybody has 100,000 to open a restaurant, it's a lot harder to do well with that money.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a lot more competition. And, if you're especially if you're looking to invest in somebody else's restaurant, they're not going to give you a great deal anymore. They're like, well, yeah, you give me the investment money and I'll give you 20% of the business. And I'm keeping 80% because I'm doing all the work. And if you say no, they know there's 8 other guys who will take that investment just to, have a colloquial example of it.
Mm-hmm.
So back to the previous point you were asking about with why are people bad at assessing risk and seeing what is risky, what isn't risky? Part of it is we're using the rearview mirror and looking backwards in time in the conditions that made the stock market do well from the 1920s through 2000 are changing. They're not changing overnight, but they are changing over time. And when you drive your car, you look out the front window. And then there's that little rear view mirror you like glance at just to check occasionally. And I think that's how people should look at businesses and, COVID risk, all that kind of stuff. You got to look forward at what the current situation that you're driving in is, not what happened back there. I think that's the mistake people make. And I think that's the mistake that was made in 2008. Housing prices keep going up.
My grandmother was in real estate and she did great.
She did great. And that's wonderful. But what you always got to remember whenever you're loaning money, you're leveraging, which means there's somebody else who has a lot more money than you who doesn't think what you're doing is smart for one reason or another. Because if JP Morgan Chase is loaning you money for a house, JP Morgan Chase could go buy that house. But there's some combination of factors, risk tolerance, the labor you have to put in, whatever it is. JP Morgan Chase is saying, nope, I'm going to give you a loan at 3%.
That's easier. My interest will be better served by letting you own the house. You deal with the broken water heater. We still get our interest payment every month.
We get our interest payment every month. Now, certainly JP Morgan Chase could hire Greystar or any other number of giant management conglomerates to do the management for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
They take a fee and whatnot. And it's not that big companies, what was that, Blackstone or whoever? BlackRock, they own a concerning amount of real estate.
Right. And that was one of the scandals that came out of, frankly, the COVID era was why are these huge investment firms involved not in making loans to homeowners, they own the homes, right? Now homeowners can't get into this real estate because these various investment companies own that real estate directly. And I think that's actually that was probably an influence on some of the home buying craze in late 2020 and early 2021 is because people were being told the smart money was investing in these things. And that drove part of the frenzy. I'm not saying it was the only factor. I mean, interest rates were at laughably low. I mean, I know people who got their mortgage interest rate down to like 2.8%, which is crazy good. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a joke. It's a joke of an interest rate. I also
Mhm.
think there were a lot of social factors, I think, that drove most of the housing turnover in that
Mhm.
time. People were suddenly working remote.
Yep.
And so they could move. People suddenly had all their friends move, or all their friends wouldn't hang out with them. A lot of people changed jobs. A lot of stuff about jobs changed, and people decided largely to leave cities and go do other stuff.
Mm.
So I think that drove a lot of that turnover. And that obviously the low interest rates really helps. Obviously, there's an influence of, oh, smart money's doing this.
Right.
But anytime I've done something, especially financial, in a rush,
Mm-hmm.
man, that gets expensive. Almost never have I been like, I've got to do this now, and later been like, oh wow,
Thank God I did it that quickly.
we made so much money on that deal. That was great. Like, that pickup truck I bought, it's a great truck. I don't think I've ever regretted buying it. And I looked at trucks on Car Gurus for like 10 months
Right.
before I bought that truck. Not that it needs to take that long for a vehicle. I was still saving up for it, pay cash and all, but it was one of those, like, I knew what I wanted and I knew the market. And when I saw that one pop up, I got on the phone to the dealership. I think it was like a day later, I was on a flight to go pick that thing up.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And when people
you could snap on it.
I could snap on it. I was like, this is a good deal. This is exactly the truck I want. It's in a reasonable location. Let's act on it.
Right, but it was those 10 months of being profoundly unsnappy.
Right.
That prep you to snap. Yeah. Yeah. Huh.
And I knew the market, which is a big problem in real estate because people do so little real estate deals in their life.
Mm.
They buy a couple of houses, so maybe they buy an investment property here or there. And if they're not well versed in it, I think the biggest problem today with that kind of investment is YouTube and TikTok, and it's gambling. It's gambling. It's, oh, I could buy this house and $100,000 richer in a couple of years because, but people don't ever think, oh, let me go learn.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I wanted to get into real estate investment, which I kind of profoundly don't, it sounds like a headache, but I would be like, oh,
all your friends who are involved in real estate are just dealing with nightmare scenarios every other weekend.
I get phone calls from these friends, they call me up, they explain issues.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
Have fun with that. I'm going to
Right. Exactly. Evictions suck. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just not. Part of that is, though, I don't understand it. I don't know the market.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know all the issues that come with it. If I was to get into that, I would want to go find a realtor in the market that I want to invest in and be like, look, can I apprentice for you? I don't want money. I just want to get you coffee and watch deals happen and run open houses for you. I want to learn the market so that I don't overpay 40 grand for a house because, oh, I was excited and I thought it was whatever. I think anytime it's like never play another man's game. You think that, I think I'm going to go invest in real estate when I'm competing against all these realtors who do this full time and are also seeing all the same listings. And by the way, they probably know something about the guy selling it and would have bought it before it hit the market. If it was really that good of a deal, it has that too good to be true thing. And with some stuff, you can risk it and learn kind of on your own. Real estate deals, I mean, so much money is at stake in every deal, and it locks so much of your money away.
It does lock up. Yeah. It locks up your liquidity in a really profound way, which can be frustrating, right? Yeah. You might have a very valuable portfolio, but your liquidity is, I mean, the absolute fastest you can move a property and dotting the I's that you should dot, crossing the T's you should cross, is 2 weeks. And that's if you have the buyer ready to sign a document today, right? But yeah, I mean, most things take at least a month, sometimes 3 or 4 months to actually move. So not that that's an argument against the real estate investment. It's just the liquidity is fairly low. Just for some people, part of the appeal, right? It's hard to devalue a home really drastically, really quickly, unless you burn it, which some people have tried. Yeah, like the insurance.
The challenge is what makes it profitable, though.
Mm-hmm.
If it was easy, it would not be as profitable. There's a reason why real estate typically out earns the stock market.
Mm-hmm. Right, because you have to deal with evictions.
You have to,
and broken water heaters.
Whereas my 401k, I don't have a good understanding of what it's being invested in.
Right.
I have no idea what's going on with the companies,
Yep.
and I don't get calls when the water heater breaks.
That's so yeah, it was funny. I was talking with someone who's a retirement advisor, and she had this guy come in, and he was into speculation properties. I think he did flips. He did had some rentals, and I think he turned 60, and he walked into her office and said, "All right, I own all of this stuff. It's mostly real estate." And he said, "And I won out, and I won out quick." And he was saying like, let's get out in the next 2 years. Um, and she was like, why are you doing this? This is like a valuable portfolio. And he said exactly what you said. He said, because you know what? The stock market's never going to call me at 2 in the morning because the furnace quit. And I don't want to deal with that anymore. I'm 60 and I'm done. Wow. I was like, I kind of had to respect him. So
Yeah.
Managing a real estate portfolio is not retirement.
it's not retirement. No, definitely not. There's just too many problems that go on. Too many people who call you. I'm locked out of my house. I forgot my keys. The ceiling collapsed. The water heater broke. All these things.
Mhm.
So, something else that you and I have had some really interesting conversations about is IQ in the population. Um, and I think it's something that most people understand fairly poorly, in a couple different ways. But one thing I wanted to pick your brain about was people think genius, and I don't know, I believe genius is considered to be an IQ of 160 or better. People seem to have this image that a genius is someone who knows like everything about everything. And I don't think that's what intelligence is really properly understood to be. What is an IQ actually putting a number on?
So IQ is a really interesting thing, and it determines way more than I think people are comfortable with
Okay.
about your life and about how it's going to go and about who you're going to associate with. I think it's one of the reasons why it's misunderstood. Is people don't want to understand it. It's not comfy. It's not comfortable to tell people that they're stupid and that there's not that much they can do about it.
Mm-hmm.
IQ, in the general sense, I think is a little bit like saying, like, how high of a performance vehicle do you have? And being like, okay, so do you have a sports car? Do you have a giant tractor that's like a combine harvesting deal? Do you have a speedboat? Do you have an airplane? It's like they're all vehicles. They all have, an engine of some type. They all do impressive things. They don't all do the same thing, and they don't do the same thing well.
Okay.
So if you go to take an IQ test, and not one of the online ones, but like you sit down with a person and you go through it,
Mm-hmm.
the report that you get back, it's like pages of information, and it will have a top line number,
Okay.
but it will also have information about, like, are you good at math? Are you good at literature? Are you good at like language modeling?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of problem solving are you at? What's gonna determine that bottom line number is gonna be some combination basically of pattern recognition and ability to solve problems. So one of the things they'll do is you'll even see some of these kind of things they're trying to do, like, hey, here's 9 shape combinations. Find the differences, find the pattern, or you'll have a series of numbers. What's the next number that should come?
Mm-hmm.
So you can have someone who's very good at something. We all know those people who they just remember stuff really well. They're well read, they've read a lot of books, and they can tell you everything about every book,
Yeah.
right?
Oh yeah.
Typically, they don't know how to do calculus. They're probably not very good at mental math. Not always, but typically that's what you'll see.
Okay.
Is they're going to be strong in one area.
Okay.
Now, you start getting into genius, and you start looking at someone who's like an IQ of 160 or above, or wherever that line is. Yeah, they're just going to be good at everything
Mm.
because, I mean, I was just looking at a table the other, that is well less than 1% of the population. You're talking about maybe the smartest person you've ever met, or maybe you've met a couple people that smart in your entire life.
Again, depending on what circles you run in.
Depending on what circles you run in, and depending on how high up the IQ. You know, we all know people who have an IQ of 130. We don't know people with an IQ of 190. Just, you know, you just don't. There's only been a few recorded that high. Like Benjamin Netanyahu, I think is above that. There's a few others, but very, very, very few that get that high.
Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel.
Prime Minister of Israel. It's 190 something or 200 or something. He is extremely intelligent.
Okay.
Yeah. So you're looking at IQ, you've got sort of these different areas. So I think just because somebody's bad at one thing doesn't mean they're bad at everything. Just because you're good at one thing doesn't mean you're good at everything.
Okay.
But IQ does determine a lot. Like if you are of below average intelligence, you're just not fast enough to keep up in a high level graduate level course. Because at some point, you run out of more time. You can't outwork people enough. So if you're taking a high school class, let's say you're taking calculus in high school, and you know, James over there, man, he doesn't study for anything, barely does the homework, comes in, does well. You go home, you're putting 12 hours a week into homework just for calculus. You got a tutor. You might be able to match him. You might be able to get just as good of grades. You're acing those tests too.
You can get those A minuses.
But you're putting in the work for it. You might even get the A plus.
Right.
But you're working for it and he's not. So now when you increase the stress load, and now James over there, oh, he's working. He's putting his 20 hours a week of homework in for this course. Now to keep up with him, you need to put 100 hours in. And at some, you know,
the time doesn't exist.
The time simply stops existing at some point.
Okay.
You're just not fast enough. You can almost think of IQ as like processor speed. Basically, it's how fast can you come up with new stuff?
How fast can you say, oh, I got it? Like, oh, that makes sense.
Right.
That now, basically, my brain can now model that thing. Speak that not speak that language in the sense of a spoken language. Speak that language in the sense of that makes a certain amount of sense to the syntax of how I think about things. Yeah.
Yes. It's also the speed at which you can run down bad rabbit holes. You get into upper level mathematics or engineering or something like that. It's not obvious. It's not solving the problem. It's figuring out how to solve the problem. So you might run down 4 or 5 dead ends that don't work on a test.
Right.
Did you spend, 2 minutes on each of those rabbit holes or 18? Start spending too much time, you run out of time. And that's just how life works. You only have so much time to go to work. You only have so much time to do anything.
Right.
So that's where people run into intelligence issues. So I think to a large extent, we can outwork intelligence, but to some extent, you run out of time and it's going to take more effort from you. And unfortunately, that does contribute to what you can do professionally and a little bit of your social circles. Social circles, like if you start paying attention, you can start to pick out and be like, oh, that guy's really smart. I actually think it's easier to pick the smart people out than the stupid people.
Stupid people keep their mouths shut more often.
Well, they keep.
Well, some of them do.
Some don't. Some of them talk plenty, and they're a little easier to find. But it's just I don't know. I smart people say stupid stuff too. Stupid people don't tend to say as much smart stuff. Like someone can make a couple comments, and you're like, wow, that guy's like jumping ahead a couple steps. That guy's on another level. I like that.
Yep,
he's probably pretty smart.
Right. Actually, honestly, if you feel a little bit insecure about your level of intelligence, you probably come up with all sorts of coping mechanisms, right? You know what I mean? Like you might come up with like people are talking about a piece of trivia or a general area of knowledge, and you might come up like, oh, come on, who has time to nerd out about that? Right? It doesn't reveal that you're dumb. It just sort of pushes away the fact that you might not really be able to figure any of this stuff out. Anyway, that's a side note.
No, I think that especially men will downplay any hierarchy that they do not do well in.
Mm-hmm.
I'm terrible at sports, and I will downplay the importance of sports
Mm-hmm.
because I sit very low on that dominance hierarchy. I just haven't done it. I haven't invested any time into it.
Yep.
Not particularly genetically gifted for sports.
Mm-hmm.
There's other things that I am very gifted for.
Mm-hmm.
And because my own opinion is, I just only like sports. They're not that important. They're kind of stupid.
Right.
So that's what I think. And that's what I will portray in a social setting too. Whereas anything that I'm good at, I'm like, oh yeah, that's really
Right.
important.
Right.
I think there's a little bit of an ego thing, but I don't think it's just ego. I think some of it is just how we view the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also self-sorting. Maybe I could have been great at some sport. Like I think if I played tennis in high school.
Mm-hmm.
At the time I wasn't very good, but I got to college and I was very good at ping pong.
Uh-huh.
Never like played in a league or anything or got really into it, but just played socially. And it was like, yeah, I'm actually really good at this. And it made me think back and go, you know what? I'll bet you if I'd put the time in high school in tennis, I bet you I could have been good at that.
Mm.
But I didn't put the time in, just didn't care enough. Wasn't my thing. And that's fine. But it's still like what you value.
Okay. But anyway, okay. So social circles, people probably tend to sort themselves roughly into groups of people in which they probably have a fairly comparable IQ.
I think people do that, but I don't think it's the number one priority when people are sorting.
Really?
Yeah.
You think it's charisma?
I think it's values. I think values come first.
Hmm.
I think next. I think it's okay. I think you got to split it, and we got to talk about like platonic social circles and romantic social circles. I think people sort differently. So
Let's talk about the sort of that higher level platonic.
yeah, the higher level
So
platonic. I think that's simpler. I think people first sort by values. You very rare to find somebody who's their best friend is on the other side of the political aisle, unless they both just don't care about politics. They're gonna share somewhat of a vision of what their lives should look like, what the world should look like, what's important to them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that sorts people, and I think interests sort people. Now, caveat to interest, I think IQ drives interest a lot. So I think that's very wrapped into the interest one.
Okay. IQ might stand behind all sorts of things that themselves are the sorters, but IQ sort of stands behind the sorters themselves.
Some of them, yes. Now, I think religion, the reason why I didn't agree with you was I was thinking about religion. And I sort my social circle primarily, mostly religious people, mostly Catholics. Not super intentionally. It's not like I'm like, oh, I can't be friends with those heathens. But that's just the way it breaks down. It's like, hey, we're doing something through church, or we're doing this event or a retreat or whatever. And you meet people, and then you meet their friends, and you have the shared value, and you're less likely to clash on stuff. And that, I think, religion does not predictably sort well at all on IQ. I think you get a really wide spectrum on that. I think it's one of the few things that's going to do that. Now, interests, yeah, to some extent, that's an IQ sort of maybe. My interests, I don't think particularly sort it by IQ. I think people that are more interested in literature and philosophy,
physics,
and I like philosophy, but I don't like other people's philosophy that much. I don't want to read what Plato had to say. I want to be the next Plato. So I'll just espouse whatever dumb idea comes into my head and see if people think it's good or not. So I think IQ does drive some of these things. I think interest is what it really hides behind. I think interest / is the person interesting? Can we have a good conversation? Do I find them engaging? And are they someone to contend with? Are they someone who will push back on me in intelligent ways? You don't want to go to your stupid friend for advice because you don't think their advice is any good. We just qualified them as a stupid friend. So you're not doing that, right? So you're going to see.
Tell me what you think. Subtext, I'm doing the opposite. But,
well, I think they're going to be a little more erratic in their answers than to always get it wrong. I think it's a broken clock problem. They're right twice a day. So you just don't know what.
Right. The erratic nature of the output is the problem.
You walk away more confused than when you started.
Interesting. I mean, that I certainly have made friends instantly because they made some comment about, wow, is not the biggest difference between men and women X, right? And they say something that I haven't thought of before that I think, I don't know if I agree with it or not, but it certainly has some merit and it certainly is interesting to contend with, like you say. And as soon as they said a comment like that, or on any number of topics, I'm instantly hooked. All right. And I have friends to this day where we became friends in 10 minutes because we instantly sorted ourselves along lines of interests, but those interests certainly depended, at least in part, on intelligence, right? I suppose, though, you could have a bunch of physics guys together and you could have a bunch of literature guys together and a bunch of philosophy guys together. They may not mix, but the average IQ inside those groups might be similar.
Yeah.
So again, those literature people are probably never going to mix with a bunch of, to use a crude term, like a bunch of meatheads who can only think about gym and pussy, right? But they might be almost equally unlikely to mix with those group of physics guys, right?
Yeah, I think there's some truth in that. I wouldn't state that super strongly.
Okay.
Because I do think sometimes people who like to think are interested in what other people who like to think have to say.
Okay.
And when the physicist talks, the guy who's good at philosophy will follow much better. So just pick up on it a little faster. The other thing I'll say on this is income becomes a huge determining factor. And IQ is reasonably tied to income. It's not incredibly close,
Okay.
but it is tied to income.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's going to sort people.
Income sorts people.
Income sorts people
really quick.
Really quick. And because of that, that's going to sort your IQ, I think, a lot.
Right. It's tough hanging out with a bunch of people who own their own airplane and say, let's go get brunch in Bruges tomorrow. You don't have your own airplane. You can't run off and do that.
Hey, man, if they've got an extra seat, you got my number. Sign me up.
Right.
I'll sit on someone else's jet any day of the week. But yeah, it's hard.
Sure, but yeah. Hey, who's right? Whose island are we hosting Thanksgiving on this year? You're the one guy without his own island. What are you doing here?
Right. Well, what are you doing here? And
what do you bring to the group? That group might decide after a while you don't bring much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you don't bring anything to the team, you get cut from the team.
You get cut from the team eventually.
You get benched, then you get cut, to use a sports analogy.
Yeah. That's interesting. I wonder where that tops out, right? I mean, if a guy who has $1 billion, does he hang out with people who have $100 billion? I don't know. Does he hang out with people who have $10 billion? You know what I mean? I wonder where the line is in which it doesn't matter. I have $1 billion, you have 10. Who cares? I could never spend $1 billion. I can buy anything. Right. I'm curious. I really don't know where that line is.
That's interesting because I just was listening to Alex Ramosi talk about income differences. And he was like, so if you're broke and you're hanging out with a guy that has like 100,000, like let's say you're making 20,000, there's less of a gap between you two than there is for me who makes 400 million and my friend who makes 2 billion.
Right.
I am more broke in relative speaking than you are.
But
yeah,
you have but he has a friend who makes 2 billion. The guy who makes 20,000 probably doesn't have too many friends who make 100.
Fair. Yeah.
Right? Probably not. He might have one, but they're not like spending all their time together. Right. Man, it's interesting.
It is interesting. Yeah.
No.
I think at some point, though, the difference is statistically, the differences look big, but I think you got a few categories. There's the like middle class and below. That's like money's a big deal. You get into the upper middle class, the upper class, and now it's like, yeah, we do friend trips that include airline tickets, but we sit in economy and we fly Spirit because we're stupid. And then, and we don't actually want to get on our vacation. But if you then go and you then step up to the people who money's just not a factor on our vacations. It's all about my time. You know, we stay in nice hotels. We don't check prices for normal people things. I decide to go on a trip before I look up the price of the airline ticket. I tell my wife, hey, let's stay at the Hilton in this city because I like that hotel. We don't price shop that to save $30 a night because it's a little more expensive this time, so we'll stay over at the Embassy Suites because Hilton was kind of booked up. You know, so you get into that category. And I think there becomes more and more mobility in that. But then you get up into those rich guys, and it's like, okay, like, do you have a private jet? Do you have a private yacht? Like, can you run with us or not? Because I don't particularly care if somebody makes more or less than me. I care if we can play on the same court. If we can play together and have a good game, that's fun. That's good. Maybe the trips I take with him are on the more expensive side of what I do. And maybe his rental car is nicer than mine. But hey, maybe I do less trips than he does. Whatever. We can play together. This is good. Maybe we make some concessions. I spend a little more, he spends a little less. But I can't keep up with a billionaire. You know what I mean? Like, he has a jet and he doesn't even think about it. Some of the billionaires are now flying around with 2 jets. Jeff Bezos has 2, and he'll often bring them both.
Like a staff jet and his jet?
No, it's a backup jet.
It's a backup jet.
He doesn't want to get there and hear that we have a sensor that's gone bad or we have a part that's broken and we can't go anywhere. And I'm sorry, you're stuck. He don't want to hear that.
For 8 hours.
Right. He doesn't want to hear that. He just wants to go. He doesn't always travel with it, but I've seen him travel with both jets.
For that reason. Just like,
yeah, and I mean,
you're going to Mallorca, the mechanics over there.
I mean, yeah, although there is a surprising amount of maintenance done on big airplanes overseas to save on mechanic costs.
Sure.
But yeah, so like you get into that realm, you just can't keep up. So I think you need to be in proximity to them, and it depends what your hobbies are.
Sure.
You can go camping. I've done a lot of camping this year, for example. Man, you can camp dirt cheap. Everybody told me camping was a cheap hobby. It's not really been my experience with camping. Every camping trip I go on, there's another piece of gear, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is important. We got to get this. That's never going to end. As long as I want to buy a new piece of gear because I love having gear, I'm going to do that. You know, in Colorado, I'm doing more hunting. Well, I got a muzzleloader tag this year. Well, I guess we better go buy a muzzleloader now. I probably could have picked a different tag and used the rifle, but there's an advantage to what I'm doing. So people will find a way to spend the money that they want to.
It's interesting. Yeah. Some people say that spending money is a form of agency for people, right? If I'm spending money, I'm making a difference in the world, right? I'm exercising my will. And some people explain this as a cause for much compulsive shopping, right? You bought more shirts. You bought another seat cover for our car. We don't need that. But that sense of agency that you get can be very rewarding to a person who may not have other sources of mental reward in their life. How much is IQ correlated with reported levels of happiness?
That's a fascinating question. I don't know. I don't know what the statistics are on that. I know stuff around income on that, and that it definitely curves off after it's old data at this point. I think the number was 70,000 or something. Reported happiness pretty much flatlines after that. Area cost of living, and I'm pretty sure that statistic is old now. But IQ, and how does that correlate? I doubt. In fact, I think IQ is correlated with depression. I think people who are smart are more likely to have depression. But in terms of like the whole picture, I'm not sure. I can't imagine that IQ makes you happy though.
I don't see how it could, right? You're refining the operations of the brain. By a very crude analogy, it seems that you're making the organ of the brain a somewhat more delicate operating instrument there's more things that could go wrong. And in a malfunctioning brain usually is an unhappy person. Right? It's harder to keep I think it's harder to keep a more complex, more involved, more cycles per minute brain balanced. Yeah.
Maybe. I also think just if you're satisfied by the simple things, you're more likely to be happy.
Mm.
You know, if what you need is, an evening with friends at the bar or a good movie to watch and a beer, like whatever it is that makes you happy,
Mm-hmm.
if you start chasing high level things, there's just so much more room for unhappiness. There's so much more room for comparison. I think valuing your intelligence leads to a lot of unhappiness. Because I think smart people think about IQ a lot more than stupid people do.
Just looked it up. Cambridge found that both higher IQs were actually happier
Really?
Higher IQs are happier.
and the lower IQs were sadder.
Let's get into the guts of that study, Right. I consider myself pretty intelligent, and am happy to tell anyone I'm a little tortured.
It would be interesting to see too. Like, I think one distinction that needs to be made in the conversation is: are we talking about somebody who's like 115 on the IQ scale, or are we talking about somebody who's 150?
Mm-hmm.
That it was saying people closer to 150 had the highest levels of happiness.
So it is going all the way, even at very smart levels, they're happier.
Wow.
That is very surprising to me.
Can you give us a quick index of sort of a layman's index of, all right, 100 IQ, average happiness? What sort of jobs, what sort of things are you noting about a person at 105, 110, 115? Like, can you give us some examples there? Like, wow, at 120, you start to notice that these people do X. Is there anything that indexes there?
There's a few things that index there. I think it was maybe around World War II. The U.S. Armed Services decided that there was nothing that somebody with an IQ below 80 could do to be useful in the military. They would not accept them, which is rather scary because there's something like 10% of the population below 80. Right, it might be 85, but I'm pretty sure it was 80. So there's a lot of people that they were like, yeah, like and it's the army, okay? They're not normally that picky, and they've got a lot of potatoes that need to be peeled in addition to everything else they're doing.
Right.
So that number is, I think, very uncomfortable.
Okay.
That is an uncomfortable reality to come to. As you move up, IQ is a bell curve, right? So most people are living near 100. So I personally think between 90 and like 110, I think there's a lot of mobility. In terms of what people do and what they study. I think, if you're at IQ of 95, you can work hard and do anything a 105 can do. It's not like you're in like a lane, right? What you can't do.
And there are certain things I just can't understand,
Right. It's like, no, you can get there. It's the 90 and the 140 that starts to be a chasm, right? So I do think, you can start breaking stuff down of statistics, and I don't have a lot of good jobs. So like, I know engineers, they're going to sit 150, around 115, 120, that kind of stuff. And
that is a direct function of the time it takes to absorb the material you have to absorb in order to graduate with your engineering degrees. You just need to be able to absorb information in a way that you can retain it at a certain rate inside any engineering program.
So much choice goes into it too.
Okay.
Of maybe someone of below average intelligence could do that, but did they enjoy it? We tend to enjoy what we're good at. And so
which means we do more of it.
Which means we do more of it. Which means we end up as an engineer because we're higher IQ. I know I think nurses have an average IQ of like 108 or something like that.
Okay.
Doctors have a higher than that, I believe, on average.
Mhm.
You know, janitors sit somewhere around like 90 or something on average. Those kind of numbers.
Gotcha.
So yeah, you see diversity. I think choice. I think it's IQ that drives choice more than IQ that drives ability with most things.
Ah.
Again, outside of the extreme cases,
Hmm.
really smart, really stupid, or really profound. Like you're not going to be somebody nationally acclaimed for their intelligence. You're not going to be a Jordan Peterson with average intelligence because average is not exceptional.
And you're just not going to produce the thoughts that people are attracted to. They have access to those level of thoughts at the water cooler at their office. Like, yeah, man, I think, you got to do what feels right to you and just follow your dreams. You can access that at a water cooler. Jordan Peterson saying something like, you need to make the jump between being a functional member of society who just sort of plugs along to finding the thing that you can sacrifice for and immolate yourself for in order to find your meaning and purpose. You don't access that at the water cooler,
But he does.
but he does. And that's why people come.
Yeah. There's a reason why he gives talks on these kind of things, and most of us don't.
Wow.
I mean, all curious. Jordan Peterson's 156. I think Elon Musk is around 155.
Hmm.
I was looking up the smartest people in the world. Nikola Tesla is somewhere in between 160 and 310. Cleopatra is estimated to be at 210.
Wow.
Apparently she can speak 10 languages.
Wow.
Um, yeah, it's really cool.
That's an impressive, yeah, that's an impressive absorption rate of different syntax, different vocabularies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's some really interesting people in here. The top one, besides Tesla, that they've recorded is Asian kid. Uh, Young Hoon Kim at 276.
Wow.
And he just got that this year in April. Yeah. He's South Korean.
South Korean.
But
Wow.
I did just look up. I was just curious because Ryan Gosling's very charismatic. He's at 160.
Hmm.
Cute. I've wondered that, like, because a lot of actors that we find, attractive, we want to watch more of, they seem very witty with their language. So it seems like they probably have a high IQ.
I would think wit takes high IQ, right? How often have we had a conversation and we think about later, oh, that's what I should have said?
Yeah.
But it's the kind of thing that you had 1.5 seconds to come up with and then decide to say. And it's normally something edgy. It's normally something like you're poking at something, you're potentially going to offend somebody. Like it's not an easy, oh, I should definitely say that.
Mm-hmm.
But it combines two disparate things that make sense once you've said it. Right. I mean, I do not mean to claim high IQ for myself, but the one I do remember this time I had a zinger, right? And people were going back and forth. They were joking with this girl. Her parents were from South America. Her grandparents had settled down there. Anyway, they were joking that because she was Hispanic, she was probably an illegal immigrant, right? And she was pushing back, right? And she said, "Oh, like I can't believe you imply that I'm an illegal immigrant. I came here illegally. You just crossed a line there." And I just looked up and said to her, "Sounds like you did too." And it was there. It was just there. But for someone who has that super high IQ, can you imagine living in a world where those sorts of things just pop into your head all the time, right? And it's just the environment you live in mentally. Yeah.
Yeah. They pop
Right.
into your head. And you don't only think about them. Right? There's not enough time. It's got to come out of your subconscious.
Right.
It just pops. You're like, oh, this would
Yeah.
be funny.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That language,
Yeah.
you're right. That language command and combination. You can combine meanings, you can combine references in a way at super high speeds. Yeah. And it just makes so much sense once you say it. So interesting. Oh, should we take a quick break? Sweet. If you're and she brought you in a cup of water from the hallway bathroom outside your bedroom. Unacceptable.
Well, growing up, we had like little Dixie cups and
Yep.
we would fill water from the bathroom.
I mean,
That was somehow acceptable.
when you brush your teeth,
Yes.
do you take your toothbrush,
Yes.
put a little toothpaste on it,
Yeah.
and then wet it with bathroom water?
I walk up to the kitchen to the faucet.
You are pulling my leg.
I mean, yes, obviously that's what I do, and I'm okay with that. But it's just the principle of the thing, considering the kitchen sink is right there. Look, if we had was
I was right there.
Oh, but it just you set the glass on the counter.
That's true. I did. You know what else I've said on the counter? My toothbrush.
Yeah, it's a little gross too, by the way. Toothbrushes.
I'm not winning. Yeah.
Toothbrushes are a little gross. It's just a
Yeah.
reality I've accepted.
Yeah, that's true.
But like, yeah, really, we should not be brushing our teeth in the same room.
We for your visit, we could assign that as the toilet of choice, and that as the bathroom for everything else.
I don't want to be. I don't want to seem.
I don't want to impose.
I don't want to impose on you and seem troublesome, especially considering I'm now realizing that I have a double vanity sink and I use the sink directly next to my toilet. Maybe I should change that.
Maybe you should move downstream.
Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like instead of being 2 feet, I could be like 6 feet.
My gosh, this April Fool's Day, I'm gonna send you a little video of me like swishing my toothbrush in the toilet.
You gotta do that and then have like a really clean edit, so it makes it look like you're then brushing your teeth with the same one.
Get 2 identical toothbrushes.
Yeah, so identical. Yeah, you know what I mean, and cut it just if you get it just right, you can do it.
Right. You doing good on energy?
I'm doing good on energy. I had my caffeine.
All right, cool. Let's roll. This is the fun one, man. We live? Sweet. Joey, why does flying suck now?
Why does flying suck now?
All right, here's what I mean. When I was growing up,
Mhm.
I think, the last generation of kids who was raised to treat flying as an occasion. You dressed for flying the way you dressed for church. Button-down shirts, tucked in. I mean, I think some of us wore ties.
Wait, really?
Yeah. I mean, the phrase was, some of us still treat flying as an occasion, right? And it was coming up when people were starting to treat flying very casually. And then in the words of our great Father James, he says, nowadays, flying is the only experience when, within the course of 1 hour, I can be treated as both cattle and suspect.
I mean,
And he's like, yeah. What happened to the industry? I mean, it used to be this elite thing. Did flying as a luxury product stop being profitable, or did they just decide there was more money in making it a mass marketing thing?
so there's a lot of factors that have gone into it. And I think your idea, as much as I want to make a joke about how old you must be if that was how flying was when you grew
Please
up,
joke away. Yeah.
I think it had more to do with who your parents were and who the French household would have been at that point in time. Because I remember our first trip to Israel showing up, and you thought the appropriate thing to wear was a sports jacket and a nice button-down shirt. And
For which I got many compliments.
I believe. And which one of those compliments did you marry?
No, I wanted to marry the girl in the Tel Aviv airport.
Yes,
the security
The
line.
one that wanted to arrest you.
Hey,
That's the one.
I would have gone anywhere she wanted me to go.
You're like, I'll
Hey, baby.
All right,
follow
take
you
me.
anywhere. you showed up dressed like that. I'm pretty sure I showed up in like old jeans and a tank top that had some kind of graphic on it and a backpack, and I thought I was dressed appropriately for flying. You did not, and I did go through a phase of dressing better for flying, and I dress better than that now because otherwise they wouldn't let me on the plane. But a few things that happened. So you have to understand the flying was regulated until like 1982, I believe, is when it went fully deregulated. So that meant the government set the price from Chicago to New York. TWA, Eastern, Pan American Airways, flight fee was fixed.
Okay.
So we competed on, well, who do you want to fly on? Because it's going to be $800 no matter what. So that's where you saw all this lavishness to it, right?
Okay.
That's a big distinction there. Which we can
How
dive
much luxury can you provide for the price that you're gonna get for your seat?
right.
Okay.
How much can you provide? The other thing is, it was an elite thing to do. Normal people didn't fly. My dad was like 21 when he took his first flight. My grandfather, I think, was older than that. And his generation, a lot of people like they didn't fly. They took trains and cars.
Sure.
And flying was very expensive back then. Now,
Which led to the regulation?
no,
Oh.
the regulation was in place largely for safety concerns because what we think of flying as a very safe thing today, you read about flying in the 1930s and flying boats that would cross the Pacific and stop off at these islands. It was dangerous. Planes disappeared and we don't know what happened. There was a famous Pan Am clipper on its way to Honolulu. It's just gone with good weather and plenty of fuel on board. We have no idea where it went. Planes used to carry cash back then. It was a famous flight. So their trans-Pacific route at the time they'd stop in Hawaii, and then they would go to Midway, sometimes Wake. Then they would hit an island, Palau, not Palau, before Palau, they hit Ponape, right? And they'd continue on, and then they would come back across the Pacific. Well, there was a flight going on that had passed through Hawaii when Pearl Harbor happened. And they just continued around the world in the other direction because they were not going back through Hawaii at that point.
Okay.
And these planes carried cash. They weren't supposed to use it, but it was, hey, if you end up somewhere, you need to buy fuel. Here's cash to buy fuel, which is a lot of money. So it was a cowboy world back then with planes that failed. Everyone would have had engine failures on these things. People crashed all the time. It was very dangerous. So you've got a government that wants to regulate this, right? And by having price control, one of the things they did was they alleviated some of the cost control because you try to make something cheap, that's not going to help with safety. If you've got more money to spend, that helps, right? So a lot of reasons why regulation existed, but it just had existed since the beginning of aviation. And that drove up these prices. Now, post 1982, we've also seen a big reduction in prices. Ticket prices today are about the same as they were in 1982 in real dollars. And inflation has just eaten that, so it's so much cheaper. It's gone from an elite adventure. You read old stories, and it's this grand adventure of a lifetime. And they will use that term regularly. And now I have friends who are, they're in college or barely out of college, and they're like, yeah, I'm going to Europe this summer. And they've bought some discount ticket and they're spending like $700 and crossing oceans with that. That just doesn't elicit the same idea. It's like, well, am I going to McDonald's or am I going to a Michelin star restaurant? I know very few people who've dressed up to go to McDonald's. Everyone dresses up for a Michelin star restaurant. I think we've seen a lot of that. I think we've also seen the casualization, much to the detriment of society in general. People used to wear a suit and tie to work. It wasn't a big deal to wear a suit and tie in 1950 when you were going on a flight. That's probably what you wanted to wear when you were in the office that morning anyway before you left for your flight. So that's how you showed up. People certainly traveling on vacation would also dress up, but that was the culture.
But everyone had suits, right? Suits were a regular part of your wardrobe.
It was a regular part of your
occasional part of your wardrobe.
Certainly a regular part of the wardrobe of somebody who was white collar, who was flying and on a regular and any kind of a regular basis.
Sure.
but it's my pilot certificate
Oh.
that this all comes back on. If
Oh.
anything goes wrong or we break any rules,
It's on you.
it's on me. The FAA is like, yeah, we don't know who he is. He's your passenger. He's just some dude on a tourist visa from Russia. Like, they're gonna be looking at me.
Wow.
So that definitely there were a couple times the plane was IFR capable of flying through the clouds. It wasn't certified at that time. It was missing an inspection in order to fly through the clouds. And there was a point where it was looking like we were going to need to fly through some clouds to get across Minnesota and a lot of Wisconsin. And I was like, he was like, yeah, let's do it. And I was like, no, not on
my certificate.
Not on my certificate, buddy. Like, you do that on your certificate, which you don't have. But we ended up we went over the top of them for like 400 miles and got over the other side and got back down. And it became a non-issue the next day. But it was kind of like we were looking at the forecast of the hotel, somewhere in like South Dakota or something, and trying to figure out like what are we gonna do. And it's definitely like one of those touchy dynamic situations you get yourself into where it's like, I feel like I have something that I need to hold on. Like, I need to do the right thing. We need to be legal. But at the same time, like, you get somebody else there. There's a little bit of a power dynamic. You know, it's a little funky. But it was a fun trip. I think it took us 2 days to get back. We got handed a check afterwards. I was like, no, guess I'm getting paid for this. That's nice. Yeah, and that was that. The Russians are not big on upfront contracts, I suppose.
Right. You get paid for performance.
Yeah, you get paid for performance if we feel like it afterwards.
All right. You've gotten yourself into early in your career. You had a couple dicey situations, if I remember correctly.
I did. Yeah, there've been a number of interesting situations. Some of which we'll talk about, some of which we won't. There was one flight though. We were coming back. So I worked for this little company, Lynn Air Center, out of Kansas, at a little small town, southwest of Dodge City.
Yeah.
And we, anyway, so this one night we dropped off a part, literally just this little box we had to bring an O-ring down to a Learjet down in Austin, Texas. And we're flying back up to Kansas and we're dodging thunderstorms as one does in the summer in that area. We get a report like 60 miles out ahead. There's a Learjet took a lightning strike. Well, what do you know? We get up to that area, bright white flash. We take a lightning strike as well. Now, airplanes are designed to be what's known as a Faraday cage. So you got metal all around you. It should just pass through the airplane and not damage anything in principle. Well, a couple minutes later, we start looking and I noticed that we've got a screen on my side, screen on the captain's side. We've got a disagreement in airspeed. I'm showing about 30 knots slower than the captain's side is showing. And we're starting to get all these yellow caution messages. Basically, we've got two separate computers, two separate pitot tubes, two entirely separate systems, and then a computer that says, hey, let me compare. And if they get out of tolerance from each other, we say, hey, there's a problem here. You don't really know what your airspeed is. So pull out the checklist. It is 2:30 in the morning at this point. And like we go through it, the captain actually misidentifies which screen, which computer, what's known as an air data computer, which air data computer is correct. There's a button on the Beechjet 400A is what we're flying. You can press it and both screens will now show from one of the two air data computers. So we click that, we click the wrong one. So now we're flying around. We have bad altitude information and bad airspeed information.
Wow.
Basically, it was the pitot-static system part of that computer had gotten hit, taken out. So we're flying along. Thank the Lord I noticed this because it was indicating a higher airspeed than we were at. And that would have been a major problem. So there's in the center pedestal, you'll have a standby instrument. It's not as accurate, but it has no computers. It's just air pressure, basically. So I noticed that little CRM, we worked that out. We said, okay, we actually think we guessed the wrong one because it's hard to know. You get two different readings. They're both plausible readings. Which one is it? So we click it back. We get on the right screen, but what we don't know at the time is, okay, we know something's wrong. We don't know what's wrong. We don't know if to trust the current data. It could be wrong too, right? Normally wouldn't be that big of a deal, but we get down about 5,000 feet above the field, and the field has got winds of about 30 knots coming out of the north.
Mm-hmm.
And we're being pushed north by a southerly wind of like 50 or 60 knots. So you're looking at 80 or 90 knots of wind shear and 5,000 feet, which is
Sorry, just so I'm clear.
please.
Where at the elevation you're at the altitude you're at,
Mhm.
you've got wind pushing this direction at this speed, and down at the ground, it's pushing in a different direction at a delta of 80 knots.
Yeah, 80 knots basically. So we were getting pushed north at 50, and the winds are coming roughly out of the north, going 30 knots the other direction.
Wow. So you have to cross between like two major airstreams.
Right. That's not the end of the world if it's real.
Oh.
The way that the plane calculates what we're in is it compares GPS speed to the speed the computer is kicking out for airspeed.
Right.
So it's possible in the area of thunderstorms to have a giant wind shear like that, and you'll get a lot of turbulence, but you'll get down through it just fine. It's also possible the instruments are wrong. So, needless to say, I made for an exciting night. Obviously, I'm here to tell the tale.
Right.
We basically just briefed, hey, if we get any kind of stall warning or any low speed indications, we're just gonna go full power, go around, and get out of here. Luckily, the air data computer was accurate enough. And we did fly through a big wind shear as we came down. So we came down, we landed at the airport, we like taxi in, hangar door open, throw the plane in the hangar, slam the door closed, and like category 5 thunderstorm right across the top of the airport.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like getting windy, and you don't want to let the plane sit out in a thunderstorm, but you also, the hangar doors on those buildings, they're so giant, they're structural. So they have like max wind limits on them. And you do not want to have your hangar door open in the middle of a thunderstorm because you could do damage to that building.
Sure.
So it was like, get it open, throw it in, slam it closed. And yeah, the next day we had damage on the wings. There's these static wicks, partially designed to attract lightning, partially designed to help you not be super statically charged when you land.
Right.
And one of those was all cracked and there were burn marks on the wing. And the maintenance finding was, yeah, our number one air data computer had just been fried. Not fried completely because it was still kicking out data.
It was still kicking out data.
Still kicking out data, but it wasn't kicking out the right data.
Wow.
So
yeah,
that was
corrupt accountant just making stuff up.
Just making stuff up, and that's not a lot of fun at 40,000 feet.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. Yeah. Well, so that's fascinating. Wow. I'm glad you made it safely. I can't even believe this, Joey. Joey, we could pick your brain all night about all sorts of topics, but we are unfortunately out of time. But I mean, I think you've told me that was your second most exciting flight. So we'll have to have you back to tell us the story of the most exciting flight. We'll leave that as a little teaser for when we have Joey Walko back on the podcast. Thanks so much for coming on, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a pleasure to be here, and I'll have to come back.
Perfect. All right. Thanks.